A man stood up from his seat and ran up the aisle towards the cockpit. As he was running, two other men also stood up and followed him closely towards the front of the plane. As they ran past the passengers, the men shouted to everybody aboard to stay seated at all costs, because they had a bomb. When they arrived at the cockpit door, they slammed it open and confronted the two pilots. They told the pilots that there were 11 hijackers on board, and that they wanted to fly across the globe immediately. Almost immediately after the plane was hijacked, the captain of the aircraft, Mr. Abate, had a few things running through his mind. You see, Mr. Abate had flown well over 11,000 hours in his time as a pilot. And in those 11,000 hours, he had extraordinarily survived two other hijacked planes as a pilot. Now, the odds of getting hijacked 3 times is a ridiculous anomaly, and since Mr. Abate had dealt with hijacks in the past, he likely remembered some significant details about what was going on. However, there would be a bit of a problem this time, because no matter what Mr. Abate remembered, this hijack would be a bit different. But for some reason, the hijackers weren't having it. They had reportedly read on an in-flight magazine on the plane that the type of Boeing 767 they were on could fly a max capacity of 11 hours. To the hijackers, Mr. Abate was lying to get an emergency landing. Mr. Abate, however, refuted strongly and insisted that he wasn't lying, showing the men that the fuel indicator on the plane only indicated enough for a flight to Kenya. But still, the hijackers did not care and continued to threaten Mr. Abate, saying that if he didn't meet their demands, they would do the job. Pilots in these situations are trained to be able to land aircraft in such off-putting circumstances. And on top of this, because Abate had stalled the hijackers by talking to them for so long, instead of just turning out into the empty Indian Ocean, which would have certainly been fatal, he was now far enough south that he could now turn out into the Mozambique Channel, which was filled with islands where he might be able to land. So when Abate originally turned left towards Australia, he made the calculated decision to fly towards an island he had never even seen before. The Comoros, a small group of volcanic islands in the Mozambique Channel near Madagascar. He figured that once the hijackers saw the plane running out of fuel, he could convince them to let him glide the plane and land there. It was clear now that Abate had to take full control of the situation, as the hijackers, who were intoxicated from whiskey and becoming increasingly angry and chaotic, were unsafe and uncooperative. Abate could rely on them no longer. So finally, after a stressful time flying in the direction of the Comoros Islands, Abate saw them come into view and began circling them. The hijackers, who had previously told Abate not to descend below a certain height, demanded to know what he was doing. At the same time, the critical low fuel indicator appeared on the plane, and Abate, who had already started his plan, pleaded non-stop with the men to let him land the plane at the Comoros. Chaos had ensued and fuel was running out. The hijackers, still completely unconcerned, reiterated that they didn't want Abate to descend any further, threatening him in anger. At the same time of their threats, however, the right engine of the plane lost power. Abate, now trying everything in his power to convince the hijackers of the severity of the situation, showed the leader the critical indication of the plane's right engine, showing him that they were now in a seriously dangerous situation. Finally, the hijackers reacted to this. They left the cockpit and went to the cabin door to talk among themselves about what to do. As they were speaking, however, with no hijackers around to stop him, Abate realized he finally had an opportunity. Inside the cabin of the plane, however, the first officer, Giannis, who had previously been beaten and ejected from the cockpit, had inspected the aircraft. He found passengers who were already wearing their life jackets. Normally, this would be good and proactive. However, some of the passengers had already inflated their life jackets. Knowing that this could be potentially catastrophic, he adamantly instructed everybody on board to deflate their life jackets immediately, and only inflate them at the right moment to avoid drowning under the plane's weight once it crashed. He knew that there was likely no hope for landing at this point. Giannis told the rest of the crew to continuously teach everybody on board the proper instructions. He then went back to the cockpit and forced his way in, past the intoxicated hijackers, shouting at them to let him help Abate. After getting in and adjusting himself into his seat, knowing that the crash will happen at any moment, he helped Abate with the heavy plane controls, trying his best to stabilize the aircraft and take control of the situation. All while at the same time, the hijackers themselves still continued to mess around with the controls, creating a completely uncertain and chaotic situation. At this point, the plane was on a collision course with the water. Abate and Giannis were now forced to prepare Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 for a ditch into the Indian Ocean.